Aloha. Thank you for watching Better Government. I'm Representative George Fontaine. I represent the South Maui District. This evening, we're going to talk about relevant issues that are occurring both in our community on the local and the national level. Joining me this evening, I have two wonderful guests to come here to share their opinions and their viewpoints about what is happening to our country and the state. Thank you both for joining me. Beth Fukumoto is the Director of Minority Research here at the Capitol, and former Congressman Charles Djou. Both of you, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on the show, George.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's talk about what's going on. I think the biggest issue that I think has really caught a lot of people's attention with the mayor's race especially has been the rail. You know, the opponents say it's a $4 billion boondoggle, that, you know, it's a waste of money. The amount of people that we're going to be able to actually transport from the west side into Honolulu is going to be a very small percentage of people being actually taken off the road and into those rail cars. Beth, what's your thought about rail? Is it a boondoggle, or is this something that is worthwhile to explore?
I mean, I think that we need to explore traffic solutions, first of all. I come from Mililani, and people out there really want something new. So first of all, I think we do need to spend some money on transportation. My biggest concern about rail is that it seems like we are pouring a lot of money into something that ultimately might not improve our problem. Especially up in Mililani, a lot of people are not going to be able to actually access it. So I think we probably need to look at a different solution. But in general, I do favor traffic solutions. We really need to do something.
Charles?
And George, let me begin by saying just, of course, thank you very much for your leadership here in the Hawaii State House of Representatives and really leading Maui. I think you're one of the really emerging great leaders here in our state. And to Beth also for your absolutely fantastic job leading the House Minority Research Office.
Yeah, I couldn't have done my job without her.
Yeah. Now, let me turn specifically on to your question regarding rail. Unfortunately, let me begin by correcting you. You said $4 billion. It actually is projected to cost closer to $5.5 billion here.
Okay.
So it's even more expensive than you originally suggested. Now, my position is I'm all in favor of mass transit. We've got to do something to address traffic. I am very sympathetic to those in Beth's area, in Mililani or in West Oahu, about the traffic congestion and its deterioration on the quality of life in our community. The difficulty I have with this rail system is that at its projected cost of $5.5 billion, to reduce traffic congestion by a mere 1.5% doesn't make sense to me. That's an enormous amount of money. And keep in mind, this is $5.5 billion before any cost overruns or delays. $5.5 billion for 1.5% improvement in traffic doesn't seem to me the best, most sensible solution. Instead, what I've always long favored is that we examine, number one, taking a look at hot lanes, which is something that the city of Tampa has been able to do very, very effectively. And I know Beth's going to go off to Florida relatively soon, and I invite her to take a look at Tampa's system. Similarly, you know, there's been proposals around about enhancing and improving our bus system and making dedicated bus lanes. This is something a lot of cities have turned to, which can more effectively move more people at a lower cost. These are the sensible solutions I think we really ought to be addressing and taking a look at, rather than just looking at spending an enormous amount of money on this system.
You know, I agree with you. I think that one of the things that has bothered me is that we really, and maybe this is the case, and I was going to follow up you know, later on this year with Department of Transportation to ask them about specifically looking at other solutions communities have done that have had busy traffic congestion. I grew up as a child in Los Angeles, and even back then, it's like the ancient time of the 70s, you know, when I was there. We had terrible problems, you know, terrible problems with smog, terrible problems with traffic. One of the systems that they implemented was ramp metering, which basically paces the cars on the time that they come on the freeway. So you get a red light, 5 seconds later it turns green, a red light, and then cars that had 2 or more people didn't have to stop. They get to go right on through. And what that does is, and then what I've observed since living here in Oahu during session and dealing with the traffic on the H1, is it paces the cars coming onto the freeway. Rather than you having 20 cars coming in onto the freeway, then everybody brakes to try to allow those people to come in and merge. So my idea is let's give some of those ideas a try and look at things that we can do in the interim until we come up with a long-range, transportation solution.
George, your problem is you're making sense here. So I don't know if that's allowed here in the state legislature, George. No, you're exactly right. There's a lot of proposals for traffic congestion resolution, such as you mentioned, ramp metering, that we really need to explore before we go off and spend $5.5 billion of the people's money. Ultimately, George and Beth, I mean, certainly, I don't think there's any disagreement. If we had an unlimited supply of money, I mean, if the state of Hawaii was just so flush with cash, we didn't know what to do with it, if money grew on trees, I think everybody would be in universal agreement to say, yeah, let's do rail. I mean, let's try anything. But the problem is that it's very easy to say, well, let's do this project and not worry about the financial consequences. And that's what fiscal responsibility is all about. And all too often I see in our government, both here locally as well as nationally, is you see politicians just saying, do this project, do this project, do this project, and not pay attention to the financial consequences of what that means and what we're doing to the next generation.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Both on the federal and the state level, I think there should be a fiscal note or fiscal responsibility. Beth, we tried to get that to fruition. Was it this session or the session before? I know that what was part of our minority caucus package was to add a fiscal impact.
Yes.
So any piece of legislation that comes out of the House or the Senate would have to have a financial analysis to show exactly what it cost. And if you think about it, Beth, it makes sense. You don't go down to the car dealership and say, I want that car, and you don't check the sticker price, because you don't know whether you can afford it or not. You see the car, you like it, and then you go to the window and you look at the sticker price, and you figure out, okay, can I wheel and deal here, or can I pay this price? And if not, well, then I got to look for a little bit cheaper model. And I think that's the way we need to look at government. Everything we buy, we should know what it's going to cost.
Right. That's actually, I think the Republicans have been introducing that since you were in the House, maybe. So we've been introducing that a lot. Part of the problem, the thing that always comes up is they say there's not enough staff resources, and it costs too much money to check how much money it's going to cost to pass the bills and all that stuff. And it is ridiculous. It makes sense to check what something's going to cost before you pass it. But I think sometimes at the legislature here, one of the problems that we have is that we don't like transparency. We're not doing transparency. The Republican caucus has been trying to make everything more transparent, trying to get things online, but a lot of the Democrats have been fighting us on that. So I think that the fiscal notes and price tags is one of those things.
Yeah, the money that you would save, I think, in doing a fiscal notes or fiscal accountability on these types of pieces of legislation, you would ultimately save in the end.
Definitely.
I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, well, we have to spend this money to buy a hybrid vehicle. And I'm sorry I keep using the automobile comparison here. But what we look at buying a newer car with greater gas mileage, and you look at over the years how much money you save by perhaps buying a hybrid vehicle, then the higher cost of getting the initial vehicle makes sense. And in this case, to get legislation to get through. And it may also cut down on the amount of bills that we submit. How many bills, Beth, did we submit last time? We had over 2,000, right?
Definitely over 2,000. And between both houses, it gets closer to 4.
So if we started analyzing these things beforehand, maybe we would actually get more meaningful legislation.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yes.
Again, George, you're making sense here. I'm not sure. Actually, if I could follow up on George on your comments as well as on Beth's here, this difficulty that the Republicans here in the State House and in the State Senate have been trying and struggling for years to get more transparency, to get more open and honest government, is even more critical in Hawaii than perhaps other states. The reason for that is in most other states in our country, there is a competitive two-party democracy. Control of the chamber isn't always guaranteed election cycle after election cycle. And there's this natural competition of ideas. Both parties have an enormous incentive to get out there, explain their position, and explain their policies to the public, and the public can see it. Unfortunately, here in Hawaii, with one-party rule, with us being really the last machine politics state left in our country, what all too often happens is that policy is made behind closed doors. It's made in a private caucus room in the majority caucus in the State House and the State Senate. A few selected key legislators write everything with input from a few key selected special interest lobbyists. And then what happens here is the public is left out in the cold. And that's not the way democracy is supposed to work. All the more reason why it's really important that we champion and we get through these open, transparent government procedures like what both of you are talking about and fighting for.
Another big issue that's come up, the big Supreme Court ruling in favor of the Affordable Health Care Act. You know, I personally, I'm scared about what's going to happen. I know that what we have here in Hawaii is pretty darn good. And Beth, maybe you can help me with this. I believe we had a bill that basically was going to throw out our system in an adoption of the federal system. Did that pass?
The problem, yeah, it did pass, but the problem is that nobody really knows how it's going to be implemented. No matter how many times we asked for an explanation, we got different opinions from different attorneys. Ultimately, they said that the goal of that piece of legislation was to actually keep Hawaii's Healthcare Act safe, but we had concerns that it would actually overturn our Healthcare Act. So we're actually really not sure, and that's what's really scary.
Well, that's scary, and the thing about it is, too, is I'm scared with the fact that, you know, as I get older here, and if I, you know, knock on wood, I don't ever have health problems, but if I do have a health problem, does that mean now that somebody in Washington, D.C. is going to make the decision on what kind of health care that I'm going to get, Charles?
You know, George, you're absolutely right to be concerned about that. We're creating this monstrous government bureaucracy, the IPAB. It's going to dictate costs of health care, what types of health care can be provided. It's taking things in the wrong direction. You know, to try and fix the major public policy problems facing our country or our community, it's a two-step process. First, you have to correctly identify the problem, and then second, you have to find a solution to that problem. Now, I'll give Barack Obama credit. I think he got step one right. I do believe that we need some form of comprehensive health care reform in America. The problem is that what Congress and the President passed, step two, is the wrong solution. They've gone in a direction of expanding the federal bureaucracy, creating this new bureaucracy in IPAD to dictate everything regarding health care. The right way to reform health care in America, I think we need four things. Number one, we need tort reform.
Yes.
That's medical malpractice reform. Unfortunately, for too many medical doctors, medical malpractice insurance is the single largest cost for them practicing medicine and the fastest rising cost. Second thing that we need to do is allow and afford the interstate sale of health insurance. For the overwhelming majority of Hawaii residents, about 90%, get their health insurance from just two providers, HMSA and Kaiser. That's not competition, and that's not helping Hawaii residents reduce the cost of health care. Third thing that we need to do is expand health savings accounts. This is most commonly known as flex spending to most people here in Hawaii. That allows individuals to pay for health care costs with pre-tax money on health care and allow individuals to have individual control to dictate how they want their money spent. Because I have far more faith in individual Americans making individual decisions about their own health than some bureaucrat way off in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And last and finally here, George, what I do think that we need to be doing is I do support some form of a tax credit for individuals who are in that so-called gap group. That is, they are too wealthy for Medicaid, but not wealthy enough to afford health insurance on their own. It will cost us money, but it'll be far, far less than the $500 billion that the president is talking about with his health care plan.
Folks, if you're just joining us, you're watching Better Government. I'm Representative George Fontaine. We're seated with me here this evening is House Minority Research Director Beth Fukumoto and former Congressman Charles Djou. We're talking about issues here locally and on the national level that affect everyone's lives here, and we just finished talking about the Affordable Health Care Act. You know, going back to that topic though, I've also heard that there may be a lot of issues with doctors basically opting out of being in practice because the reimbursements would be so low, and yet, as you said, without tort reform, the cost of insurance and everything else is so high.
You know, George, you know, you're exactly right. In your community in Maui, especially in the neighbor islands, we have a huge shortage of medical doctors, and it's the specialized professions which are suffering the most, with great shortages of the specialties on all of the neighbor islands. And you know, George and Beth, I would invite you, and I invite all of your viewers, ask yourselves, have you ever heard somebody go into the doctor's office and say, you know what, really there's not enough bureaucracy. You know, really, I haven't filled out enough paperwork. I really feel that, you know, what really we need to do in addressing America.
But it's all automated, Charles.
Yes, you know, we need more bureaucracy, we need more paperwork, we
Yeah.
need more government regulation to go in and visit our doctors. I don't know about you guys, but I don't hear any of that. What I do hear about is this concern that costs are rising way too fast. Healthcare consumes 16% of our nation's GDP. Far more than most westernized nations.
Yes.
What we got to find is an effective way to contain costs but still continue to provide quality care for Americans. Most Americans are happy with their medical doctors. We have, in terms of quality of care, the finest quality of care in the country, in the world, excuse me. I, again, very rarely hear individuals saying, well, geez, I'd really rather go to a foreign doctor than an American doctor. Well, but it's the cost that we've got to address. And then the problem with the Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, is that it doesn't address that major concern, cost.
Well, the other thing that concerns me is that, again, if you look at historically in our country, back in the 60s, we had folks that were on public assistance funds and programs, welfare and other things, was about 6% of the population in the United States. Today, that number has risen to like 36%. So, you know, that's a quite drastic leap. That's more than a quarter of our countrymen that are receiving some sorts of public assistance. Now, granted, that also includes Social Security and other things. But there's a lot of folks out there now that we've kind of grown into this nation of entitlements, and this is also an issue even here in the state of Hawaii, that, you know, once these things, like in our retirement system, once these benefits are given, it's very, very difficult to take them away. What is your thoughts about how we're going to rein in our 15 or what is it now, $16 trillion debt in this country? We obviously have to have a safety net to help folks who really need to have help. But my gosh, you've got folks, it's the highest time of any time ever that we've had folks that are on quote on disability and receiving disability payments. And I'm sure there's legitimate folks that need it. But
yeah, you know, George, picking up on what you're saying here, you know, one of my favorite quotes is from Ronald Reagan, who said, the closest thing man has ever discovered to eternal life is a government program. And you're pointing out exactly the problem, that once you create a program, it's very difficult to extricate from it. And that's why we have to be very careful, both in the state level as well as in the federal level. When we create these programs, we can afford them and we can fund them into the future. In terms of the federal budget, and we're looking at this enormous $16 trillion national debt, which works out to over $50,000 per American, and that's man, woman, and child. Even the newborn infants born today owe $50,000.
And that's not including the state?
Yes, and that's excluding county and state debts here also. This is a huge problem that we have got to confront immediately. And for my perspective, what's important that we need to do is we got to start balancing our budgets. I mean, that's why I've been a long champion for making sure we get a balanced budget.
It's like a household. You know, you reach the max on your credit card, you don't go out and ask for a higher debt limit. And that's what we've been basically doing is stretching the debt. Now, Beth, talking about local debt, you know, one of the big key things that's going on now in the state of Hawaii is our unfunded liability for our retirement folks. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it looks like right now that EUTF, we owe about $14 billion. And ERS, the Employee Retirement System, is about $6 billion. So we have all this money that we owe. And one of the things the legislature tried to do was adjust the benefits that we're going to give seniors and others. To me, that's unfair. That's not the route we should go. If we've promised benefits to people, I think it's too late. We need to give them because those people have fixed incomes. What we can do is start adjusting prospectively. So employees, somebody my age coming into the system now, shouldn't get the same benefit package that somebody 30, 40 years older has because we can't afford it anymore. So that's where we should, at the very least, it's a measure that would at least stop the bleeding, if you will, so that we don't keep increasing the debt.
I think that's true in the long term, although we've got some serious hurdles, as I recall, looking at the budget analysis in like years 2 and 3 down the road, where this is going to kind of come to a head. And then I think it'll flatten out as we start looking at it. But we need to look at perhaps maybe other areas of ways that we can try to reduce our cost of government overall so that we can match it.
George, if I could just interrupt and just jump in here, both of you are talking exactly what we have looming ahead of us here in Hawaii, that we've got to get control of the spending and this looming debt. And oftentimes when I hear politicians, especially here in Hawaii, talk about programs, they get so into the weeds. They talk about this program and that program and lose sight of the big picture. I think there's a fundamental philosophical difference that I have, and I think we have, versus the approach, I think, by the majority right now, and that is, it's not about government programs that's going to save us. It's not going to be yet another legislative initiative. What makes America great is individual Americans making individual decisions. You know, my My dad immigrated to the United States from China, and my mother immigrated here from Thailand. Neither of them came to the United States because they believed that our nation was the land of government handouts. Neither of them came here because of a federal government program. My parents came to this country, as I believe your ancestors and Beth, your ancestors, came to this nation because we believed that America was the land of opportunity. And too much of our government today is losing sight of that. Too much of it is all about, well, how do we do this program? How do we tweak this program? What are we going to do about this spending? And not enough focus is being spent on what is it about how we can encourage more individual Americans to become entrepreneurs? How can we encourage small businessmen? How can we encourage that individual American spirit? Because that's what makes America great, the American dream, not a government bureaucracy.
And I agree. And the thing about it is that, you know, we throw money at these problems like the unfunded liability, and they did it in the county of Maui. They raised everybody's property tax, lowered the exemption, and they did it with the reasoning that, well, we have to help address the unfunded liability. The problem that I have with that is that there's no plan. I mean, you've got to come up with a plan so that, okay, so now going forward we're going to charge X amount for property taxes, and this over a period of time is going to, but there's nothing. It's just we throw, okay, and then next year what do we do? Do we throw more money at it and raise the taxes some more? If we have a plan, then we know how to proceed forward with trying to address the issue. But it's like anything else. You know, you don't run a business without a business plan. The same thing now in terms of coming up with debt reduction, a debt reduction program. There needs to be a plan in place. And I don't feel, and please chime in if you disagree, but I don't feel that by raising taxes we're going to do anything to solve that problem. Only we're going to hurt the poor the most, especially on an excise tax increase.
Right.
Beth?
Yeah, that's one of the things this year. The majority said that we'd maybe spend about $500 million out of our GET so that we could try to address those unfunded liabilities. But we cannot do that every year. We need that money. So I think that's, yeah, we cannot keep increasing taxes to do that.
You know, George, the thing about increasing taxes is that tax increases may provide a very limited short-term boost to government revenues. But over the long term, when you suck money out of the private sector, you take money out of the pocketbooks of average Americans, what happens is the economy slows down. You don't get as much economic growth, unemployment increases, and over time, you actually make less money when you increase taxes. Over the long term, the single best way for the government to make more money, the government to be able to get more money to spend more money, is a healthy, vibrant, growing economy with low unemployment. That's the key. If we want more money so we can pay off these debts that the state of Hawaii has, so we can turn around these gigantic, enormous budget deficit and national debt facing our country, the key essential ingredient is getting economic growth going. And again, that's a problem I have with so many politicians, both here in Hawaii as well as in Washington, D.C., that I see them as so incredibly short-sighted. They only can see what's in front of them for the next year. They can only see the next budget cycle. They don't look over the long term, what's going to happen over the next generation. Instead of looking at what's going to happen with the economy as a whole and trying to get a healthy, vibrant, dynamic, growing economy, both here locally as well as nationally, it all comes down to, well, let's just increase taxes right now so we plug an immediate hole, no long-term thinking. And that's a major problem.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that's got to be the plan. I mean, they say we're not going to increase taxes, but then I know the folks are hurting in my community because, you know, we raise the registration fees, and I've had businesses come up and they're screaming. They're saying, I can't afford to register my commercial vehicles anymore. I got 4 trucks, and now I got to spend it. That's money I got to take out of an employee, or an employee's hours I got to cut back now because that's an added expense I didn't see coming at me. You know, what's going on over there? So, you know, that's the thing. I think we all have to take that into consideration, so looking at what the unintended consequences. And as a legislator, that's what I've learned. You know, we have about 3 minutes left, and I want to give both of you an opportunity, maybe about a minute 30 each, to talk about what you think is the biggest problem facing the state of Hawaii right now.
Okay, well, I'm going to actually add 2 things. One, I think we need to diversify our industries, which is what Charles just talked about. And the second thing would be to improve our education, because right now a lot of our kids are not educated for the jobs that are open. So we need to do both of those things.
You didn't use all your minutes.
Yeah. Well, George, again, let me thank you and thank Beth for letting me come on to your guys' show and chat with you for a little bit here.
We're very excited to have you here.
Thank you. You know, I think that the biggest national issue facing our country, facing all of us as Americans, is this looming national debt. And it's, if we don't take care of this, it's going to take care of us. I do not want our generation to be the first generation in American history to leave the next generation worse off. And I see what's happening in countries like Greece and Spain and Italy, where their debt is overwhelming their countries and they cannot make their own decisions. They no longer become the masters of their own destiny because debt has consumed them. I see America going down the exact same path unless we reverse course. Here locally, in our state of Hawaii, we have similar problems with our debt and our spending, but I think the biggest issue facing us here locally in our community is trying to break up this monolithic one-party rule in our state. Until we get dynamic, competitive elections, the people who control the levers of power and decision-making in the state of Hawaii rest with a very small select few. That's not right. That's not healthy. That shouldn't be what the future is. We need a healthy, dynamic, vibrant, two-party democracy here in the state of Hawaii if we want to move our state forward in the 21st century. But instead, we're mired right now in a legislative structure and a state government structure that was really constructed in the 1950s during statehood that hasn't changed. And that model may have worked really, really well in the mid-20th century, but today in the 21st century, it is breaking down, it isn't working, and if we want a future for our families, our children, and our grandchildren, we have absolutely got to rip that up and reform and change.
You know, I couldn't agree more with you, Charles. You know, unfortunately, unions back then are much different than what the unions and the power struggles that go on here are now much different. And I think it's going to be a hard road, but I believe in the people of Hawaii, and I think we are going to come through all of this. We're going to work hard, and we're going to make Hawaii a better place. Yep. Folks, thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you to former Congressman Djou and Beth here for joining me this evening. If you'd like to write or comment about the show or have other ideas for topics for better government, please write to me, repfontaine@capital.hawaii.gov. That's repfontaine.capital.hawaii.gov. And send me your comments. And I appreciate the fact that you joined us this evening. Aloha.